Episode 2, The Settlement. This podcast is based on personal experiences and opinions. All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent unless proven otherwise in a court of law. While every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, this is not a legal proceeding, and listeners should not interpret the contents as verified legal fact. Welcome back to the Spencer Files. I'm your host, EJ LeClair. If you haven't listened to episode 1, go back and start there. But if you have, here's a quick recap. We began this story with my grandparents, Chet and Lois Spencer, and the family that once surrounded them. We talked about the growing divide, the gifts that may not have been gifts at all, and a horrifying moment in July of 2015 when my Aunt Melissa told doctors to stop the support that was keeping her mother alive. My grandfather had no idea. Luckily, we reversed it just in time, but that moment changed everything. It was the first clear sign that something deeper and darker was at play. Now, let's talk about what came next. Melissa positioned herself as Lois's advocate, but she had no background in legal or medical matters. Soon after, she moved Lois from the ICU in Thousand Oaks to a long-term care facility in Orange County, far from the rest of us, but minutes from Melissa's home. She said it was to help manage Lois's care, but from our perspective, it felt like control. Updates were rare and often came through Facebook posts that felt more like performances than actual communication. After the accident that nearly took both of their lives, my grandmother Lois had a personal injury claim. Melissa and Darren took control of that too. Darren recommended a lawyer who I'm going to call Attorney Jeffrey, someone Darren had a working relationship with through the credit union where he served as CEO. This wasn't an independent referral. This was a hand-picked arrangement. Sometime during my grandmother's stay in that facility, a settlement was reached in Lois's personal injury case for $1 million. None of us were told, at least I wasn't. The bulk of that settlement, we would later learn, went to attorney's fees and to reimburse insurance. That's not unusual, but what was unusual was not hearing anything about it. That settlement becomes important later, not because of the dollar amount, but because of what it represents: isolation, control, and greed. In 2017, my grandfather, Chet, and I were talking in the kitchen during a family gathering at his home in Oak Park. My wife Anna and I have 2 boys, Jace and Joey. Jace was born in 2014, Joey in 2016. Chet, being the generous man he is, had helped us buy an SUV right before Joey was born. Although later, you'll hear how I ended up paying for it myself anyway. Chet wanted to help us get a new car because he didn't want the boys riding in Anna's small Jetta that just started to have problems. That day, Chet asked how the new car was running, how the boys were, how our school district was, and how our townhouse in Simi Valley was working out. He was especially concerned about the stairs and the balcony. Joey was a climber and a jumper. Then he asked, "What would it take to get you into a house?" I told him, realistically, the only way I could afford a house right now is if my payments stayed the same as what I'm paying. He asked, "Well, what would that be? What would you need?" I said, "Geez, like $300,000. Without missing a beat, he said, "That's not a problem. We can do that." I hugged Chet and didn't think much more about it, but Chet did. On September 18th, 2017, he brought it up again and asked if I'd seen any homes that I liked. I have a real estate license and I look at listings all the time. A house popped up in the same neighborhood my parents live in. One of my childhood friends grew up in this house, and it was in a cul-de-sac that was filled with a bunch of familiar faces. I sent Chet the address, although I accidentally transposed the numbers. He figured it out and drove by the house with my grandmother. The next day, September 19th, he texted me. "Drove by 437. Amazing. Perfect home for you and your family. Mom and Dad would be very happy." So, I called the agent. The house had been in escrow, but had recently fallen out, and it was available. Chet didn't just like this house. He loved it, and he was excited about it. The next day, I went to my credit union to run the numbers, the same credit union that Darren is the president and CEO of. Chet and I were in constant contact. He called and told me to factor in renovation costs. I said we could fix things over time. The house wasn't in bad shape, but Chet insisted that we do it right, and we do it right now. Since we had little kids, he didn't want them living in a construction zone. He suggested that we wait to sell the townhouse until after the remodel. I said I couldn't afford 2 mortgages, so he said, "Tell the loan officer I'm backing you. I'll help cover both if you need it." My grandmother told me, "Let Chet do what he wants. You can't stop him, and it makes him happy." The loan officer got back to me and said that I need to put about $335,000 down to keep the payments the same and eliminate mortgage insurance. Chet said, "We'll go to the bank tomorrow." On September 25th, we met at the credit union. Again, the same one that Darren is the president and CEO of. The assistant manager helped Chet move funds from CD, which we were later told Darren had to sign off on to avoid penalties from withdrawing from it. Chet requested a check for $335,000, plus another check for $15,000 for renovations. That $335,000 went into my account to cover the down payment. In hindsight, I don't know why we did it that way. He was already going on the loan and the title. Kind of dumb, but that's what we did. On October 6, 2017, the loan officer called me and asked who would be on title. I texted Chet and asked if he wanted to include Lois. He said it would be a problem getting her to sign, so no. She was having trouble with her hands, and he didn't want to burden her with the paperwork. I let the loan officer know and continued on with my day. On October 11th at 2:10 p.m., I got a text from Chet. I had a bad fall in the living room. Saw my neurologist, mild concussion. I called him right away. He assured me he was okay. Chet was always cautious about his brain health. His mother had dementia, and he took every supplement, medication, and precaution you could think of. That same night, at 7:57 p.m., I got into a car accident. Just a bad day all around. I texted Chet, and he called me. We talked for a while. He could tell that I was rattled. My back hurt, but I was okay. Strangely enough, I was driving the same car he and Lois were in when they got into their accident. What was with this car? October 31st, 2017. Halloween. We officially close escrow. We brought the boys over to see the house and trick-or-treat our new neighborhood. It felt like the start of something big. I remember thinking how surreal it all was. My kids' costumes, our dream house was now officially ours, and the possibility of building something long-term. What I didn't know was that this house, the very one my grandfather helped us secure, would become the lightning rod for the family conflict. But that night felt like magic. When you look at how this started and how it continued, this wasn't a man being manipulated, not by me anyway. This was a grandfather investing his family with full awareness and joy. But while Chet was helping us build something new, Melissa and Darren were waiting to tear it down. These are people who had already received help from Chet, cars, a boat, property, and now they were questioning why Chet was helping me. They didn't ask out of concern. They asked because they felt threatened, and because they wanted the money for themselves. My grandmother once told me that Melissa had been trying to talk them into helping her buy a house in Hawaii. I guess their other houses just weren't enough for her. While I was trying to protect my grandfather and keep a promise to build a better life for my family, they were actually preparing something entirely different. Lawsuits, accusations, and schemes to take what they thought should be theirs. In the next episode of the Spencer Files, I'll share what happened after we closed escrow, including how Darren, who didn't even show up to my wedding, suddenly became obsessed with me, and how the help Chet gave me lit a fuse that would lead to lawsuits, violence, and the unraveling of everything we thought was secure. Thanks for listening.